There are moments in life when the silence hurts more than words. Moments when a familiar presence slowly disappears, not with a fight, not with a clear goodbye, but with a quiet distance that leaves your heart confused. You wake up one day and realize that someone who used to walk beside you no longer does. The conversations are shorter, the warmth is gone, the bond feels fragile, almost invisible. And the most painful part is this: you don't know why. There was no betrayal you can clearly name, no argument to point at, no obvious reason that justifies the separation, only a growing emptiness and a question that echoes inside your soul. God, why are you allowing this? This kind of pain is different. It doesn't scream, it whispers. And because it whispers, it stays longer. Many people believe that if God loves us, He will always keep everyone close. But spiritual truth is often the opposite of what our emotions expect. Sometimes God protects us not by adding, but by removing. Not every distance is abandonment. Not every separation is rejection, and not every loss is a punishment. Some distances are divine interventions. There are people who are close to us physically, emotionally, even spiritually, but whose presence slowly begins to weaken our soul instead of strengthening it. And here is something few are willing to say out loud. Not everyone who smiles at you is aligned with the path God is preparing for you. Some people walk with us for a season, others walk with us for comfort. But only a few are meant to walk with us into deeper transformation. When God sees what we cannot see, He acts in ways we do not immediately understand, because God sees the future consequences of relationships long before we feel their weight. He sees the subtle discouragement, the quiet doubt being planted, the emotional dependency forming, the spiritual stagnation creeping in slowly. And when a relationship begins to pull your soul away from peace, clarity, or growth, even subtly, God intervenes. Not always loudly, not always dramatically, but firmly. Distance becomes the shield, and what feels like loss is actually protection. Now, before we go deeper into this truth and uncover why this process is so painful yet so necessary, I invite you to do something important. Subscribe to this channel, because the reflections shared here are not meant to entertain you for a moment. They are meant to strengthen your soul, awaken discernment, and help you understand the silent ways God works in your life. If you've ever felt confused by separation, misunderstood by distance, or wounded by silent goodbyes, this channel is for you. Take a breath. Stay with me. Because what you are about to understand may change the way you see every loss you've ever mourned. There is a spiritual principle hidden behind distance, and once you see it, you will never interpret separation the same way again. God does not remove people randomly. He removes them purposefully. And the soul always knows, even when the heart resists. At first, the soul resists distance. We try to explain it logically. We replay conversations. We search for mistakes. We wonder what we could have done differently. The mind wants clarity, but the soul senses something deeper. Because when God distances someone from your life, the confusion is part of the process. If He explained everything immediately, you would cling. If He revealed the full reason too soon, you would resist. So instead, He allows silence to do what explanations never could. Distance begins quietly. You notice that your peace feels interrupted after certain conversations. You feel tired, not physically, but spiritually. You feel misunderstood, yet unable to explain why. And then comes the guilt. You tell yourself, maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe I should try harder. But discernment is not rejection, and protection is not cruelty. There is a difference between loving someone and allowing them continued access to your inner life. God cares deeply about what has access to your soul, because the soul absorbs what surrounds it. It absorbs words. It absorbs attitudes, it absorbs emotional climates, it absorbs intentions, even unspoken ones. And some people, without realizing it, carry storms inside them. Storms of resentment, storms of fear, storms of unresolved wounds. When you stay too close for too long, those storms begin to touch your peace. God does not remove people because they are evil. He removes them because they are misaligned with the season you are entering. And seasons matter. A relationship that was harmless yesterday can become harmful tomorrow, not because it changed, but because you did. Growth demands space, transformation demands clarity, and clarity cannot survive where emotional confusion reigns. Many people think God distances others as punishment, but punishment crushes. Protection preserves. When God distances someone, He is guarding something fragile and precious inside you, something still forming: faith, calling, healing, discernment, obedience. These things cannot mature in an environment of constant emotional interference. Now listen carefully to this truth. Not everyone who walks away is being taken from you. Some are being held back from following you where they cannot go, because where God is leading you, certain attachments would slow you down, or distort your vision, or drain your strength. There are people who love you sincerely, yet unconsciously resist your growth. They prefer the version of you that stays small, predictable, comfortable, not because they are malicious, but because your transformation confronts their stagnation. So God steps in. He creates distance not to hurt you, but to keep you from shrinking. And yes, it hurts. It hurts because love was real. It hurts because memories were real. It hurts because the bond mattered. But pain does not mean error. Some of the most painful separations are confirmations that God is actively involved in your life. I once heard someone say something that stayed with me. When God removes someone, He often does it gently enough that you don't panic, but firmly enough that you cannot pull them back. And that is exactly how it feels. You try to reconnect. You try to restore what was. But it doesn't respond the same way. Doors feel heavy. Conversations feel forced. Energy feels blocked. Not because love disappeared, but because grace moved. And here is something even more difficult to accept. Sometimes God distances people who want to stay, and sometimes He distances people you want to keep. Because desire is not discernment. Your heart chooses based on attachment. God chooses based on destiny. There are testimonies of people who only understood this years later. They looked back and realized, if that person had stayed, I would have doubted myself. If that person had remained close, I would have delayed obedience. If that relationship had continued, I would have compromised my healing. At the time, the distance felt cruel. Later, it felt merciful. God often reveals protection only after danger has passed. That is why faith is required in the moment of separation, because distance feels like absence, but it is often guidance in disguise. And as painful as it is to admit, some relationships are answered prayers, others are answered lessons. And when God removes the lesson, it is because it has already taught you what you needed to learn. There comes a moment when the soul stops asking, "Why did this happen?" and begins asking a different question. What is God protecting me from? This shift does not happen quickly. It comes after resistance, after tears, after silent prayers that feel unanswered. But once it comes, clarity begins to replace confusion. Because when distance is guided by God, it carries certain signs that are not emotional, but spiritual. One of the first signs is this: your peace increases even though your heart still aches. You may miss the person, you may grieve the connection, but deep inside there is less turmoil, less anxiety, less inner conflict, less pressure to explain yourself. Pain remains, but chaos leaves. Another sign is this: you stop feeling the need to perform or prove your worth. Before the distance, you may have felt misunderstood, constantly adjusting, constantly justifying your feelings, constantly shrinking to keep harmony. After the separation, your soul breathes again, not because the love was false, but because alignment was missing. God never asks you to lose yourself to keep someone. Another sign appears quietly. Your prayer life deepens, not louder, not more dramatic, deeper. You pray with honesty instead of fear. You speak with God instead of defending yourself before people. Distance removes distractions, and distractions are often disguised as relationships. Then comes the most undeniable sign. You begin to grow in ways that were previously blocked. Confidence returns, clarity sharpens, discernment matures. You start making decisions without guilt. You start trusting your intuition again. You start hearing God's guidance more clearly, because some voices, even gentle ones, drown out divine direction. This is why God creates distance, not to isolate you, but to recalibrate you. Now let me share something that many people experience, but few talk about. There are testimonies of individuals who begged God to restore certain relationships. They fasted, they prayed, they waited, and restoration never came. Years later, those same people looked back and said, "If God had answered my prayer then, I would have delayed my healing." I didn't realize how much I was compromising myself just to keep peace. I thought I was being loving, but I was actually abandoning my own soul. There are also testimonies of people who reconnected years later, but only after both had changed. Because sometimes distance is not permanent separation. It is necessary transformation time. God does not rush growth, and He does not force alignment. He waits until the soul is ready to choose wisely. One person shared something simple, yet profound. When they left my life, I felt rejected. But when I healed, I realized I was being redirected. Another said, "I cried for months, asking God why He allowed the distance. Now I thank Him for not letting me stay where I would have slowly disappeared." This is the hidden mercy of God. He cares more about your soul than your comfort, more about your destiny than your attachments, more about your eternity than your familiarity. Distance teaches discernment. It teaches you the difference between connection and dependency, between loyalty and fear, between love and emotional survival. And here is the truth that brings peace, real peace. God never removes without replacing. He may not replace immediately. He may not replace in the same form, but He replaces with clarity, with strength, with deeper faith. Sometimes He replaces people with silence, and silence becomes the space where you finally hear Him. Acceptance is not forgetting, it is understanding. It is saying, "I release what no longer walks with me. I trust what God is shaping within me. I honor the season that ended without trying to resurrect it." And when acceptance settles in, something remarkable happens. You stop chasing closure, because peace becomes your closure. You stop replaying the past, because your future begins to feel lighter. You stop asking God to bring people back and start asking Him to guide your steps forward. This is spiritual maturity. This is healing. This is protection fulfilled. If you are listening to this and feeling a quiet recognition in your heart, know this: you are not being punished. You are not being forgotten. You are not being abandoned. You are being guarded. And one day you will look back at this distance not as a wound, but as a turning point. A moment when God loved you enough to say, "This is far enough." And finally, peace followed. If this message resonated with your soul, if it helped you understand a separation you could never explain, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Here we speak about the silent ways God works, the truths that heal slowly but deeply, and the discernment that protects the soul. Stay connected, because understanding brings peace, and peace changes everything.